Hi, my name is Bernard Rivera. Welcome to my first ever Blender 3D tutorial. Today I will be showing you how to get this sketchy look from a new implementation in Blender called Freestyle and PR. Now, it should be noted that this will not be an all-inclusive feature set of Freestyle, nor will it be an explanation of all the options. I've already seen two that have to some extent explained it quite well. And there's also the wiki, which is quite good. In fact, it's one of the, I consider one of the better parts of the wiki, although the Blender wiki is pretty good, but this one's specifically very in-depth. I liked it very much. So, now that the disclaimer's out of the way, let's get into it. So, this is my finished product, and we see there are two separate lines that you can see. There's the yellow line, and there's the turquoise line. The yellow line is sort of like a rough sketch, so that it will have little holes in it, if I can find them. See here? So that there's multiple strokes that don't necessarily overlap all the time, which to me looks quite normal when people are sketching kind of rough. They'll move the pencil back and forth, and the pencil doesn't always line up perfectly, so that you get those little divots and little gaps. And then there's the guiding lines in turquoise, which, again, they're guiding lines. But it's not that simple. Guiding lines, if you do guiding lines straight up in Freestyle, you will get these really angular looking, like rectangles of color. It looks quite terrible. You have to change it. So you have to add these little dips to it, and it's this randomness to the angle, which comes from, fortunately, noise functions, which I love noise functions. I use them all the time. I don't like using textures. I like to create these noise functions in Blender because they're resolution independent. So now that I've talked about this. Oh, wait, I haven't talked about this yet. I'm sorry. Let's get to this. So this is my inspiration for it. This is a drawing by Glenn Keane from the movie A Little Mermaid. And if you've seen the movie, I assume pretty much, most people have, this is not what you see. Not at all. There aren't all these crazy looking lines, which I think they look quite nice. They have a lot of volume, but unfortunately, with cell shading, they clean this up so that you don't get all these beautiful lines that make it look like someone actually drew it. Because they're not perfect, but that imperfection, I think, adds to the allure and the beauty of the drawing. And I really like Glenn Keane very much. So that's what I'm trying to emulate. Sort of. Obviously, it's not perfect because this is procedural. It's done by computer. An artist would hand pick exactly where each line went. So you can't obviously get such a crazy effect like this, but you can get quite a nice little output from it, at least in my opinion. So now that I'm done talking for real this time, let's get into Blender. So here simply I just have little Suzanne and a little camera. Not so little. It's kind of huge compared to Suzanne, but nevertheless a camera. And because we're going to be using Freestyle and not Blender Render, we don't need any lights, and we have to set any materials to Suzanne, because Blender, unlike Blender Renderer or Cycles or Yafare, Freestyle does not use lights or materials or any of that interaction. Instead, they use strictly the geometry as seen from the camera. So now that I'm done with that, let's go to my settings first off. First, you should realize that it'd be quite clever to turn off the Blender render part of the shading to expedite, the changes and the options for Freestyle. And because you do that, well, unfortunately, when you do this, you can't really turn off completely. You just switch off all the different passes. So the render will still go through all the little tiles. So you want to increase the tile size just to make it go faster, because again, it's not evaluating anything. So if you make them bigger, it won't have to keep switching as often. Just trust me. Make it bigger, it'll go faster. Or you can experiment with it to get the precise size to get the fastest on your machine. But for me, I found that 64 by 64 is pretty good. So after that, you gotta obviously turn on Freestyle. You can change this to relative thickness, but I don't like doing that. I have to keep it absolute because a lot of the settings here in Freestyle will be done in pixels. So I think it's kind of more intuitive if you make the line thickness and everything the same, change in the same way. But unfortunately, that means that when you change the dimensions, say you want to go by it even faster, so you make this 50%. Well, the thickness will look twice as much as if you had 100%, because again, it's done by pixels. So you have half the pixels, but the thickness is still the same number of pixels, so it looks twice as thick. So keep that in mind if you're gonna switch resolution or not. You know, sometimes errors lead to really good, interesting outputs, which I found, but most of the time it's terrible. But you know, feel free to make a mistake. So here I already have 3 different render layers. You have the tune layer, which it can be anything. It can be diffuse or just Blender render. But I planned on doing a tune shader, but I didn't really like how it looked with these drawings. It just wasn't. It didn't look hand drawn enough. It just looked way too fake. Obviously CG. So I decided not to, which is why I have that with no color inside. But you know, if you do want it, make sure you have it separate from your Freestyle render layers, so that the Freestyle is not bogged down by rendering the shading first. So I've made two extra render layers, sketch and guidelines. Obviously the sketch will contain the sketchy look, and the guidelines will be the guideline look. So here I turned off all of these little passes and just clicked Freestyle. So again, so that the render doesn't actually shade anything, so it goes faster. You can I just kept it how it was, like that. You can turn it off Z and whatever you want, but you don't really have to. And obviously you have to add a line set. So let me just erase mine. Add a line set. I'm gonna change mine to guidelines. Quite clever name, I know. Quite original. Yeah. You can tell I'm an engineer. I actually am, but you'll have to take my word for it. I have no way to prove it to you over a video. So, you have these edge types here. Sorry, that was a really terrible transition, but I'm gonna keep going. After you get rid of this little thing, which I need to show you, this is how it comes, you know, stock. All these things are not turned on. I liked it that way. The crease might be different, but I won't be using the crease, so this doesn't matter. That affects just the crease edges here, which I won't be using. So I'm using silhouette and border. I like it because you get the outside quite well, and then you also get some of the inner features like the nose and the eyes. Excuse me, I'm getting a little hoarse. I've been recording this quite a few times. I keep messing up. I crashed. Well, no, I didn't crash. I can't get anything to show up because I forgot to click a little button. So I was halfway mostly done with this, and called myself an idiot. I was like, there's no way I can put that on the internet. There's no way. So I'm re-recording it. So again, we talked about how they're guidelines and such, and they're squiggly, so we have to add that. So fortunately, there's actually a modifier called, if I can find it, guiding lines. There we go. And when you use this, you don't need sampling, so I'm just gonna get rid of it. So what guiding lines does is it makes guidelines out of your geometry, your mesh, instead of having a really close, smooth drawing made out of it. So I'm gonna change the offset. What this does, it when it makes a guideline, it will shift it to the normal direction, which ends up being just perpendicular because it's 2D. But when you think about it in the 3D sense of your geometry, it's along the normal. So it pushes it away from the model in 2D space. So we have that. That looks very nice. But if you render it, you won't see anything. And I'm not going to bother rendering it. So I'm going to go here. You have to add Sketchy. I'm sorry. You will get something. I'm getting ahead of myself. So we have the guidelines. Let's see. First, let's change the color so you can actually see it. Guidelines were turquoise. So hopefully this doesn't crash. I'm going to save it. Make sure to save often because, again, it's a new implementation, so it's a little buggy. It'll crash. Sometimes it's not obvious. And yes, I was right. This won't actually do anything because we have to do splitting. So, I knew I was right. Actually, I didn't, but I was hoping I would be. So you have to split it because it tells you it tells Blender how to draw these guiding lines. So I already enabled chaining. That just, when you make it sketchy and you make multiple rounds in chaining, it makes it so that there are recursions of the same drawing, but they're like a different seed, so it'll look different. I'll show you in a second. Okay, so I have clicked on these two different splitting parameters. This is the minimum 2D angle. Now, it seems to me to be counterintuitive, but the higher the minimum is, the more, or the closer to the actual geometry it will be. So the lower this is, the less resolution kind of you get. So I'll show you. I like that 170. Hopefully you will too. And if you don't, well, feel free to experiment. Hopefully you'll get a nice look faster than I did. And I don't know why it's not working. It is not. Oh, wow, now I look dumb. That's why. But again, I do believe that if you switch off these, it won't render anything. Hopefully, I hope so. Oh, no, you do get something, but it's hideous because it's just randomly choosing, I guess, how to make them. So you may make it 170. I hope my computer's warming up. I hope I don't start crashing. So we get this thing, but unfortunately, that doesn't look very good because, again, it's doing it exactly at the angle. So you get this really long one because that part is kind of not very curvy. As we can see, it's not very curvy. Here it's pretty flat on top. So you have to tell Blender to split it according to length as well. This is curvy linear length. So this is kind of like, if it's bigger than this, if the length of a line after you split by 170 degrees is this size or bigger, split it again. I found 250 works quite well. I like it very much. You can choose a little lower, like 200, but I found that the lines kind of overlap when you add sketchiness to it, which we're going to do right now. So we're going to see the difference, and I think it adds a little bit more realism. So you see there's a little bit more lines, and they kind of, some of them kind of are a little bit different, kind of like if you had drawn a line, you didn't really like it, so you fixed it a little bit, and then you didn't erase, which I do when I draw. I don't really bother erasing very much until, I'm going to clean up my drawing. And I find that a sketchy of 2 rounds works quite well. Again, I'm going to save. You should always save right before you click F12, because that's when it crashes. It crashes only when you start rendering it. So we're going to get to this. We just have the guidelines right now, but we have to add that wiggliness to it. So there are a few different noise functions in Freestyle. The ones we're going to use today are Perlin noise and spatial noise. So there's the big difference between these two is that Perlin noise is executed at an angle. So I have mine set to 45 degrees. I didn't bother to change it. I like how it looks. So basically, if your line's going at 45 degrees, you won't see any sort of wiggliness to it because the noise is being added to it along its length because it's at the same angle as this. So that makes kind of a strange, you can tell it looks a little weird. So to counteract that, we're going to add the spatial noise, which it works again along the normal, just kind of how the offset works. Except this isn't really normal, it's perpendicular, but you get my drift. So I just switched off smooth and pure random because I like it looks better. Pure random makes it less coherent, and then you smooth it to make it look more coherent or less like twitchy. I just didn't like it. So for the purlin, actually, hopefully it doesn't crash. Again, I'm gonna say that a lot, but if this crashes, you're gonna have to sit through me reopening Blender, which I don't think you want to do. Okay, so here we go. This is our output, and it looks like someone drew this using lint from your dryer, which is actually kind of a cool thing when you think about it, but that's not what we want. It looks way too crazy. We see there's too much fuzziness and there's too much wiggliness. By fuzziness I mean it's like the small changes, and then there's too much, the wiggliness is kind of like the bigger curves. So we're going to change both of them. So for purlin, I'm going to up it to about 22.7. Anything around that, if you don't like such a weird number, you can make it 20 or 25. It doesn't really matter that much. I'm going to change the output to do 5, so it doesn't do quite as much craziness. But I'm going to change the octaves to 6 because it gives it more depth in the more subtle movements in it, which I quite like. And then spatial noise, we're also going to make this smaller. We're going to make it 2. We're going to keep the scale. I like it. But we're going to, again, change this to 6 so you get a nicer result. So this is strictly the geometry modifiers. So it looks quite good, except you see the thickness is kind of like pretty constant. We don't quite like that. It doesn't look very realistic. So what do? We add a thickness modifier. Here we go to a long stroke. And then you change this to curve. Now what a long stroke does is it allows you to define how the thickness varies from like the root to the tip of the stroke. So what we're going to do first, change this to multiply so that the thickness is kind of independent, so that you can, it's simply varying this value as opposed to setting the value here, because you can only really set it to 0 to 1, so it would be really thin. So here what I like to do, I move this up, move this down. If you're really like, you want to be really accurate, I made it to a quarter, 0.25, and in the middle I made it 1, right around, yeah, there we go, in the middle. And you'll see how this changes quite a bit. And again, I'm going to save because you never know when it'll crash. And boom, you get that. But now we can see that the thickness is too low. Far too low. Again, I apologize if you can hear my fan. It's an awful thing. It's like, it sounds like my computer's dying all the time. But it isn't, or at least I hope it's not. And again, that's not enough. I believe I wrote 20. I hope it's right. It'd be embarrassing if my notes didn't really help me. And I feel like that's a little thick. So let's change it to 15. Again, if you like that, but I want to go for that crayon look. And unfortunately, with that thickness, there's not enough little holes in it. That's a little better. So I believe we are done here with this one. So I'm just gonna click it off. We're finished. First, let me make sure. Yeah, we're finished. So now we're gonna go to Sketch. Again, it has all the same settings. Even in the Freestyle section here, we're gonna add a little Freestyle line set. We're gonna make this Sketch, just so we always remember we're in Sketch. I'm gonna change this, the line style, to Sketch as well. and I don't know why there's a 2. Oh, it's because I've failed at doing this quite a few times in this tutorial. That's why there's multiple ones. But that's okay, we don't really care. Oh, we have to just switch off crease so it's the same. Now, before I do anything, so we don't have that whole debacle again, change to sketch so that when I render it doesn't show up blank. So, going back here, we see that, again, like I explained, you have divots in it, and believe it or not, that's not one line, it's actually multiple lines being looped together, but they're all different. And that's how we get that kind of those holes and non-overlapping lines. So, first off, we gotta go again to the geometry. That's the first thing you gotta do. This time we won't be using the guiding lines, so we do need to sample. And I found sampling of 2.5 is sufficient. If you do it too high, you'll get these ugly like curves in it and all these artifacts that look unrealistic. Like no one would ever draw loops as they're sketching. Like they're really tiny loops. Like they look like someone like very controlled sneeze and just like whoop whoop and drew them. So that's why we have to set it kind of low, but don't set it too low because it'll eat up your memory and the computing time will go up quite a lot, which we don't want, especially because this isn't even like, you know, it's just a line renderer. We don't want it to be drawing lines for like an hour because, you know, it's like anything, you have to set the correct amount of time to it. You have to devote the correct amount of time, and I feel like that would be way too much. But if that's your thing, go for it. So again, we have to add some spatial noise, but well, first let's edit this before I say the but. So I made it 2, and then I changed the scale to 25, so it makes it slightly different from before. And I made this 6, so again, it's real nice and deep in its subtlety. You get this thing again. Let's change the color before I continue. I always forget this. I've done this tutorial quite a few times, and I just keep forgetting to change the color. It's embarrassing. It's quite embarrassing. So, let me see. We have these little waves, right? That's all well and good, but it's if we change the strokes here, you have to put same object, or else you'll crash. Trust me, it took me a while to figure that out. Let me save it just in case it does crash. Again, see, it does the undulations. You do get some things, but it's not nearly enough. It's not nearly enough holes. Someone is very good at drawing over the same spot again. So we have to add something else. Turns out, something very useful for this. You know what it's called? If you said polygonization, you're a very good guesser, because I highly doubt you knew. If you did know, you wouldn't be watching this tutorial. Or maybe you were. But regardless, assumptions only hurt people like me. I just look dumb if you said polygonization. So, what polygonization does, wow, I can't even say that right. Polygonalization, just poly for short. What it does is, it's similar to the guiding lines, except it kind of links them together. So that instead of having this smooth drawing, it gets a little bit more what I call chinky, like N64 graphics, very angular. Of course, we don't want it to be very angular, we just want it a little angular. That's what the error is for. If you put 0 error, it will be exactly like the curve, like if this wasn't even on here. So you have to add a little bit, and I have error of 2. So now we do this. Again, save just in case. And yay, it's looking quite good. Except we're getting some ugly things. And you're saying, hey, how did I fix that? Well, we haven't changed the thickness yet. That is where part of the magic happens. So again, I'm going to change this to curve. I believe I increased this to 5. So that when you increase this, these ugly overlaps, like in certain parts it'll be obviously angular, it'll overlap a little bit more and it looks a little smoother. So here, we're not going to do the same as we did before. Instead, we're going to do it like this. Put the edges to 0, and then in the middle, really close to the edges, we're going to put it up close to 1. And this will change it, the look quite a bit. Oh, I can already tell you, it's not going to look right because I forgot to change it to multiply. That's why it's so thin. Again, we want to save it. So it's starting to look right, but it seems like I'm missing something. It's not looking quite like I expect it to look. Please allow me to change through this quickly. I apologize. For some reason it's not looking right, but I feel like, yeah, all my options are right. Oh, actually my sampling, I need to make it 2. That's why it's looking weird. Remember, save, or else you're gonna have you start getting kind of upset about this. So that's how you do that. Now you have 2. Oh, I didn't render the other one. Let me turn that one on so we can render both of them. So you render these. Now you have these 2 layers. So you have the sketch layer, and then you have the guidelines layer. How do you add them? Well, unfortunately, I could not find a way to actually put them together correctly in Blender. Because no matter how you do it, the colors will get added together, as opposed to if you just kind of press them on top of each other like in animation you would. You would just you make a rough drawing, and then you would put a tracing paper over it, and you would do a better drawing. And then you could put both of them and show them together, and your better drawing would overlap the lines so that the lines only show up where your drawing isn't. So I have to flip over into Photoshop. And now I know people are gonna say, "Hey, you should have used GIMP. It's open source." But I'm on Mac, and GIMP does not behave on Mac, unfortunately. So, fortunately, my sister has Photoshop, and I guess you can actually install multiple licenses on different computers. So that's what I did. So I'm gonna open. Oh wait, whoops! I forgot this. You have to save them first. So let's save them. I already saved them. So I don't need to do that. But yes, if you are doing this, you will need to save it. So I will open. I very inconspicuously label them untitled. So here's untitled. If it ever shows up. Wow, it does not want to. Oh, here we go. My apologies for the wait. I'll just entertain you. Just kidding, I can't. I'm not very clever, as you can tell from this entire whole debacle of a tutorial. Please give me critiques because I want to be better at this. I don't want to bore people for the rest of my life. I actually want to teach engineering in the future. I don't know if I've told you, but yes, I'm studying engineering. I said it on some of the recordings, but I'm not entirely sure. So you literally, in Photoshop, you literally just add them on. You just 2 different layers. Oh, sorry, you kind of have to do some crazy stuff. Again, I'm not very good with Photoshop. Actually, I haven't said that yet, but yes, I'm not very good with Photoshop. I'm very new at it. But this is easy. You just leave it at normal. And this looks quite nice. You know, you can fill in the transparency. But instead of doing that, let's see if I can actually open my old one. Here it is. I believe it's Tune PSD. I actually went on Google, and you can find it very easily, on how to get a nice paper texture. And you can see there's these little, almost like it's a little dirty, to make it look like paper. And that, I think it looks quite nice. And that is how I made my final output. So it's gonna be a really awkward goodbye because I don't really have anything to say. But hey, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you understood it, and also I hope I didn't really completely bore you or look stupid in any form or fashion. But if I did, make sure to tell me so that I can change it and not look stupid in the future. Well, that is all. I hope, again, I'm Bernard Rivera. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'll see you soon, hopefully. Probably not, but hopefully. Bye.